Hi everybody and welcome back to Abbey Books, and today I'm going to cover Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen and its modern interpretation by Amanda Quain entitled Ghosted. So what I want to cover is this book, Ghosted, by Amanda Quain. And this is a modern day interpretation of Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey novel. So first, let me give you some background on the Gothic, or the term Gothic. The history of Gothic actually originated around the 12th century, and it referred to architecture, which began in France. So, for example, you have the Cathedral of Notre Dame. That is a classic Gothic cathedral, and it has things like the flying buttresses and pointed arches. It also has these huge stained glass windows and the gargoyles. Everybody knows about the gargoyles. Now, that was a classic Gothic style of architecture. And when Gothic was adopted in the 18th century, it was used as a literary description of something that was dating back to the Middle Ages. Something old, something antiquated. Okay, so the first instance of that was from author Horace Walpole. He wrote a book entitled The Castle of Otranto, and it's his book in the title that labeled it a Gothic novel, because he wanted to give it that feel of old medieval element to it. So now let's look at some characteristics of typical Gothic novels. All right, we had mystery and fear. So this dealt with burials and flickering candles, evil potions. An example of that would be The Mysteries of Udolpho, written by Anne Radcliffe in 1794. It also has an atmosphere or a setting that gives a mood of this Gothic feel. So things like dark forests, castles, stormy weather, all this gray skies type of thing, that sets the mood, this Gothic mood. It also has, well, more than likely, some graveyard nearby, somewhere on the grounds or in a church not too far from the castle itself. Okay, so an example of this would be Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which was written in 1818. That's an example of that. All right, another aspect of a Gothic novel would be the supernatural or paranormal activity, spirits and ghosts, inexplicable events that happen. You would also have supernatural creatures, vampires, for instance. So you have Bram Stoker's Dracula, which was published in 1897. There's also a romance in a Gothic novel, but these romances have some sort of tragedy or sorrow attached to them. There's also a villain, more than likely a male figure, and this person is in a position of authority. They may start off as kind and understanding, but they may be doing this in order to deceive their victim, who is usually a young woman. Now, an example of this would be The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and that was written in 1886 by Robert Louis Stevenson. Now, a next characteristic of a Gothic novel would be some emotional distress, and in this we are referring to the female victim. She feels trapped, she feels panicky, and that's because the position the villain has put her in. The anti-hero, as a male character, has suffered some sort of trauma. They have some sort of great emotional burden on them, which makes them vulnerable. And an example of this would be The Picture of Dorian Gray, which was written by Oscar Wilde in 1890. Another factor, we would have a damsel in distress. So she suffers at the expense of the villain. So now we're going to deal with modern versions of Gothic. We call it teen YA paranormal or fantasy. And there's certain characteristics of this genre, which is you would have the main character on a solo quest to save the world. That's one characteristic of this. And an example of that would be Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. Another characteristic would be there's some sort of love triangle going on, like in the Twilight series. Another characteristic would be a dystopia of some sort. So this would be an example of the Divergent trilogy. Another characteristic of the modern version would be good versus evil. So another one is absent parents. That plays a key role. So for example, the Harry Potter series has absent parents for Harry Potter. And the next one would be discovering abilities. Harry discovered his ability. He was a wizard. In Ghosted, the setting is a Gothic setting because the building, Northanger Abbey, has been purchased and turned into an elite high school, a boarding school. And the architecture of the school is Gothic. And it has a long history. And of course, with that comes stories of hauntings. There are absent parents. So for Hattie, who is the main character, her father has passed away, and she has her mother, whom is referred to as Dr. Tilney. And that gives you that element of coldness, of business, of some sort of an emotional wall going up. And she is a distant parent. She's not really home a lot. She's not loving and warm like Hattie's father was. So there's that distance, which is like a parent not being around. Now let me give you a general summary of the story. So the setting is an elite boarding school on the East Coast, Northanger Abbey High School. And it has a history of paranormal activity, and there's always these paranormal interest groups that will come onto the campus trying to record some sort of reading. The protagonist is Hattie Tilney. She is Henry Tilney. So Amanda Quain has flipped this, gender bended it, if you will. And the main character, the Henry character, is Hattie. So we are going to be reading the story not from Catherine Morland's perspective, but from Henry Tilney, Hattie Tilney's perspective, which is really cool. And there's also Freddie, who's Hattie's older sister, just like Frederick in Northanger Abbey, being the older brother. And Liam is the youngest sibling, just like Eleanor was the youngest sibling in Northanger Abbey. Dr. Tilney plays the role of General Tilney, this person who's not warm and fuzzy, basically. Kind of puts everybody on edge, tense. That's Dr. Tilney. Hattie's father, like I mentioned, had passed away. His character was the opposite of Dr. Tilney. He was warm, he was affectionate, he was very supportive of his children, he was very supportive of his wife. He was a paranormal enthusiast. It was a hobby of his he did on the side, and Hattie used to always go with him on his little recordings or when he did research, and she was very close to her father. The way they handled the grief after Hattie's father died, Freddie checked out. She dropped out of college. She just became a partier, a rebel, and she didn't give a flying rip what you think or felt. She didn't care. And Dr. Tilney was not exactly this warm and caring mother, so Freddie figured, Mom doesn't give a shit either. Neither do I. Then we have Liam, who became very fragile after his father's death. He sort of retreated within himself. And Hattie had this sense of responsibility to protect her little brother. In the meantime, Hattie had developed a persona at this elite high school she carefully guarded. And then she meets Kit Moreland, a transfer from Florida, from a public Florida high school. He won a scholarship from a paranormal society. It's called the National Paranormal Society of Investigation. He's thrilled to be at Northanger Abbey because he loves everything paranormal. Hattie, on the other hand, has just pushed that all away since her father's death. And wouldn't you know it, in one of her classes, the teacher puts Hattie and Kit together, and they have to do a project. And of course, Kit wants to do it on the paranormal activities around campus. So Hattie's going to do her best, but she's really dreading it all. But what she doesn't realize is this friendship that she has with Kit is actually going to help to remind her of who she was before. Kit is nothing like the elite students at Northanger Abbey. Kit, just walking on campus, did not blend in. He was down to earth. He had a sense of humor. He wasn't there to impress anybody. He wasn't trying to win any brownie points from anybody at school. He was in this to enjoy, to explore. He was just such a breath of fresh air for Hattie. She found herself drawn to him, unable to stay away from him. He has a sense of humor. He has a wit that had me laughing throughout the book. And that's what struck me, that Amanda Quain wrote a paranormal teen YA novel with no paranormal activity, just kind of in the setting of the story. But the ghosts were those that lived within Hattie because of her grief. And I'm going to read you some excerpts to point out how that interaction unfolds in the story. So it says here, this is Hattie talking about herself. That was me, the strong one, the one who is keeping it together. At least you have Hattie, I'd overheard one of my mother's friends say to her once, right after we'd come to Northanger. And she was right. It was my job to be exactly what she needed me to be. Freddie was a mess. Liam was too young. So now you know that Hattie's carrying the world on her shoulders. And she's put herself under all that stress and anxiety. Constantly having to keep that up takes a toll on you. How good I'd gotten at pretending things didn't matter to me. How hard I'd worked to separate myself from his legacy, her father. From letting a single tragedy define my life. How I'd pushed and pushed, taking on every ounce of ambition my mom had thrown at me so that I would be as far away from him as possible, because the farther away I stayed from my dad, the less it hurt. So you see, this was her way of dealing with grief, was to just simply deny it. And I think every single one of them was trying to deny it, but we know more about where Hattie is because the story is coming from her side. So when Kit comes into her life, she doesn't want to let him in, but he's getting in somehow. And she's sort of fighting it off, but then she's not fighting it off because he's touching a part of her, I guess, that she misses. And she very slowly, kind of reluctantly lets it happen. And you see that change happening through the story. And in describing her mother, she says, this is Kit's interpretation of her mother. She does kind of have a very appropriate Gothic Lord of the Castle thing going for her. Kit said, looking in the direction she'd gone off in, are you really that scared of her? She's your mom. Hattie's response, she's Dr. Tilney. No one ever really understood this, which was fine. I didn't need him to. That's the role she cares about. Because Hattie Ruth thought her mother really did not care for being a mother. You know? And Kit has a sense of humor. I was trying to capture it. There's so many instances in the book where you see Kit's light, that sunshine he brings to such a gloomy setting. He's talking about his roommate. Hattie has FaceTimed him because she has a question on the project that they're working on, and she asks him if his roommate is there. And he says, no, I've barely seen him since I moved in, Kit shrugged, turning the phone so I could see the empty bed across from him. He's on like 5 sports teams or something. I don't think we're going to stay up all night doing each other's hair, but I'll live. Do you ever wonder? And then he starts asking a deep question, which she doesn't want to talk about. But his humor is just, you will enjoy Kit because he really is an adorable, funny, likable guy. Exactly what Hattie needed. So here are some of her revelations. When she talked about what was inside of her. I was exhausted from searching and searching and searching, from looking for myself and never finding her, from keeping my gaze behind me instead of ahead of me, from being the person everyone turned to as some sort of beacon of responsibility. How were you supposed to find the energy to keep looking when you were so incredibly lost? How was I supposed to bother with my search when I was standing next to Kit Moreland, the epitome of found? This was what it meant to be haunted. And I think that's what stands out to me, that Amanda Quain used a paranormal theme to talk about ghosts in a very unparanormal way, but rather she turned it to talk about feelings and addressing those feelings and being able to move forward from there. In Hattie's case, it was grief. She had to put her feelings about her father dying and her having to live without him, and she didn't want to, about learning her new normal, a healthy new normal, not the fake new normal that she had made for herself. And the person it took to do that was Kit Moreland. And I think it worked so well for Hattie is because Hattie had put on her mother's persona, hard persona, so that she could move forward, or so she thought. And Kit Moreland came in, and Kit Moreland was her dad. He was so much like her father, the person she missed so desperately that I think she just didn't have a chance. She loved being with her father, and she was her when she was with her father. And he came back to her in the person of Kit Moreland. And she was able to find herself once again. So this is the biggest part for me, was how those two helped each other out so much. And that's it. If you guys have read Ghosted, it was written recently in 2023. If you've got any feedback or ideas, go ahead and send them my way. I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Take care, everyone.